going, Tom? At your leisure.
Oh, well, my leisure indeed. Here it is. August 30th, 2020. I am in the thick of COVID. I am not sick with COVID, but I am sick with nearly every other thing that you could possibly be sick with in the current environment, which is overcalled the new normal, or cleverly called the new abnormal. And I am sick of that phrase, and I'm sick of the concept, and maybe the new nausea or the new apocalypse, something like that. But I think the word that bothers me most, people are all saying they're retooling. What's the other thing they keep saying? There's a couple of words that they keep using. The one that gets me the most, though, is everything is robust nowadays. It's like they want to energize their soul in some meager capacity to say we have a very robust schedule. We have a robust agenda. We have a robust plan. We do a robust screening. We have a robust kitchen. And I have nowhere to go with this tangent, but I would recommend that I'd like to have a break from the robust martial law. If anything was more dispiriting than the conventions this year, and I think mostly for want of audience and due to the fact that they're Hollywood commercials, it was the relentless pounding away on a good defined by hard work, really hard work, a lot of suffering and sacrifice, a lot of toil, a lot of the need to be strong and independent and have 3 jobs. I mean, one candidate, I won't say who, presented a woman and her child. She had to have 3 jobs, and that kid's a hero. The essential workers are heroes. The caregivers are heroes. The teachers are heroes. It used to just be the military, the vets, the National Guard, and the police, but now everybody is a hero. And the idea of that involving struggle and sacrifice and more work seems to me this big funnel to get you down exactly where they need to have you, working and struggling and proud of that fact and strong and resilient, and we will survive. There's a heroic ballad at the end of all of these things. I know the tangent has gone too long, but I did want to say this. If I made 2 mistakes in life, and actually I've made several million, it was going to school and it was going to work. Please don't do either. And with that, I'd like to introduce Laura Packer, storyteller, professional storyteller, coach, consultant, keynote speaker, and she gave me almost a year ago, a box of stuff to collage. And a lot of people pass along bits of papers because I do a lot of collaging, but she gave me this treasure trove of, it was children's books, comic book clippings, and actual items from Lemuria. Laura Packer.
So Tom, you know that Lemuria is actually where my family comes from, right? So, when I was a kid, there was nothing on earth more delicious than my Aunt Betty's chicken soup. In fact, I was firmly convinced that she made the best chicken soup in the world. And she would make it whenever we had family gatherings. All of my relatives would come together in her cramped little row home in northeastern Philadelphia. And we would talk and laugh. Mostly I would listen because I was the littlest one there. And half the time they were speaking in Yiddish, and I certainly didn't know what they were talking about. But they thought whatever they said was funny, so I thought whatever they said was funny. And I would eat Betty's chicken soup. The broth was clear like salty sunshine in your mouth. And the matzo balls were somehow simultaneously as light as clouds and as heavy as lumps of iron that have made their way down to the bottom of the ocean and are completely rusted away. But it was perfect. The dill would float around in that broth like a constellation of little green specks, and it was my favorite thing to eat. And as we would all sit there, the conversation going back and forth, the soup being slurped down noisily, I would look at the old tablecloth. It had so many stains. It was so ratty, and it didn't matter because it meant that this was my family and it was safe. Now, my grandparents came to the United States from Russia. And when I was gathered around that table, it was with people of my grandparents' generation. They had died long before my parents even met. And then people of my parents' generation and no one else from mine. And they would tell stories and they would laugh, and I would wonder what it had been like over there in the old country. They never talked about the old country, but I wanted to know. And that's not so uncommon in immigrant families. The people who come over, they want to be American. They want to be part of the culture, and they want to remember where they came from, kind of. But what matters is that they're here. And at least back then, they knew that they were safe. And then their children, my parents' generation, well, they want to forget all the old country stuff because their parents' accents are embarrassing. The weird foods they eat are even worse. And then my generation, the grandchildren of the immigrants, were the ones who were hungry to find out about what was. But my grandparents had all died. And when I asked my parents, when I asked my father about his parents, did they have Russian accents? Did they ever tell stories about the old country? He'd mumble a little bit and look embarrassed and change the subject. So I would ask Betty when I was a kid, what was it like in Russia, Aunt Betty? And she would say, oh, doll, I don't remember. We came over here when I was just a little girl, and all I really remember is the boat coming into Ellis Island and the big ladies standing there to greet us, and they gave us hot dogs to eat. It was the first time I ever had a hot dog. And I remember they showed us a movie with a little man running around on the screen. It was Charlie Chaplin. You ever see Charlie Chaplin, doll? And then we would talk about Charlie Chaplin or hot dogs or whatever else it was that she wanted to say. So as I grew up, I stopped asking those questions. I read books to find out who I am and where my family was from. I learned some history. I learned folk tales. I read fiction, but I didn't bother asking anymore. And I grew up. I went away, went to college, moved to another city, built my own life, but I still wanted to know. So one time when I came back, I went to visit Betty. I hadn't seen her in years, to tell the truth, and I was shocked at how tiny she was. When I was a kid, I'd always looked up at her like she was some kind of giant, but now I was looking down, and I have to tell you, I am none too tall myself. She was so happy to see me. She embraced me in her bony arms. She made chicken soup, and I asked her finally to tell me her secret. How did she make it? And she said, well, I'll show you, doll. And so she showed me how she made the broth, which is really little different from how I make mine. And then she said, I'm going to tell you there are two secrets. Secret number one is if your broth don't work, you just use it from a can. And I have to tell you, I was devastated to hear that. It was made even worse when she sat down to show me how to make her matzo balls. She said, you got to buy the Manischewitz matzo ball mix. That's the good stuff. All those years, I thought she had made it from scratch. But the soup still tasted good. And then I said to her, Betty, I really want to know about my family. And she said, doll, I told you a million times I don't remember anything. And I said, I know, but I looked around at her house. The house was the same as it had been when I was little. The carpet was the same. There was that same coffee table with a marble top that sat in the middle, and that same bowl of candy sitting on the middle of that marble top, probably with the same candy in it as had been there when I was a kid. It certainly looked dusty enough. The furniture was still covered with the same plastic slip covers that I had stuck to when I was a child visiting. My flesh would stick to them and I would peel away from the plastic, that sound like Velcro ripping open. It was the same plastic slip covers. It even still smelled the same, kind of like stale food and mothballs and time. And I looked around the house and I said, well, do you have anything maybe from Russia? And she said, oh, well, I got the stuff that I have that I bought when I went to Russia back in the 1970s to visit the relatives that are still there. I mean, there aren't many of them anymore. They all died or they all went other places. But, and she showed me all these tourist trinkets. No, Betty. Is there anything from our family? Anything that maybe someone brought over when they came in through Ellis Island? Do you have anything? She thought for a bit. Doll, all I have is the stuff you've already seen. What do you mean, Betty? I haven't seen anything. You haven't shown me anything. Oh, honey, she said, I've got only a little bit, but it's not nothing. That tablecloth, the one that we always had the family dinners on, and the candlesticks where we'd always light the candle and you would always want to play with the wax, and I'd tell you couldn't. Your grandmother, she brought them over from Russia. She told me that when they came and they banged on the door in the middle of the night and told them that all the Jews had to leave, she grabbed the only thing that she thought was important. So she grabbed the tablecloth, because your grandmother, she always set a nice table. And she grabbed the Shabbos candlesticks, because she said she always liked to see the way light flickered on people's faces. And so, when she died, I got those things. I thought of the tablecloth that I had eaten so many meals at when I was a child. I thought about how I got yelled at when I dribbled borscht on it. But truthfully, those borscht stains that were on the tablecloth just joined a constellation of other stains. Stains from red wine, stains from chicken grease, stains from so many things. And when I was a kid, I just thought it was dirty. But now when I looked at that tablecloth on Betty's table, I saw it as a whole map of history of my family. It told stories of meals eaten, meals that I would never taste, meals cooked by people long dead. And the candlesticks, the one that were still there on the table, the 2 silver candlesticks made of that beautifully woven silver, but always tarnished, always a little battered. I remembered how when I was a kid, I loved looking at the light on people's faces from the candles flickering in those candlesticks, and thought that my grandmother did too, and I felt connected to her in a way that I never had. Betty must have seen my face light up. And she said, "You want that stuffed doll? It's just old and beat up. I was thinking about giving it away, but if you want it, it's yours." So of course I did. We folded up the tablecloth and rolled the candlesticks up in it, and I imagined my grandmother doing exactly that after the fist had banged on the door. And I looked around and I said, "Betty, is there anything else? If there is anything else, don't give it away to someone else. I'll take it." And she said, "Well, the only other thing I really have is that old sewing machine." Now, when I was a kid, that old treadle sewing machine had always sat in the corner, and it was always covered in dust. I liked going up to it and pumping that treadle with my foot up and down. I loved the rhythm of the sound it made, and I always got yelled at. "Don't you play with that sewing machine," they would say to me. "You're going to get your finger stuck in the needle." I looked at it. The wood was battered and scarred and worn, the varnish coming up. And she said, "Yeah, didn't I ever tell you? Your grandmother, not only was she a great cook, but she loved to sew. She told me that when she came to America, when she got here, when they finally had enough money, the first thing she bought was that sewing machine. She said that if you came to a new country, you should have a new piece of clothing. So she made new clothes for everyone in our family who came. She made me a dress when we first got here. She made my brother, your Uncle Meyer, may God bless his soul, she made him a nice little suit. She made something for all of us, and she did it on that sewing machine there. And when she died, I took the machine. I don't know how to sew. I've used it just to pile stuff on all these years, but I was going to sell it or give it away. No one sews on those anymore. You want it?" Together, we pulled the sewing machine out of its corner in the dining room and pushed it to the front of the house. It was so heavy, all of that iron, but I managed to get it down the stairs and into my car. Betty and I talked a little bit more. She wrote down her recipe for chicken soup, and really I have to tell you that now mine is just as good. And then after a while, I kissed her goodbye. I put the bundle of the tablecloth and candlesticks beside me, and I drove off into my life. I've lived in so many places since then, and in each of them I have the sewing machine. And every now and then I spread out that tablecloth and put candles in the candlesticks and make a meal for people I love. I watch the flame flicker on their face. And I cannot help but think every single time, what would I grab if they came banging at my door? Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. That was beautiful and poignant, and it wasn't heartbreaking, but I guess in poignancy you often get a flicker of that. I wanted to add to my tangent earlier that just a week ago, Amazon announced that it's renting entirely vacant shopping malls to use as warehouses. So they can now plant and distribute all of the stuff that used to be sold by small independent businesses and people who once had jobs and were called a key maker, a cobbler, or a haberdasher, or whatever it is, a tailor, doesn't matter anymore. So after driving all of them, this is why the stock market looks good. It's why it's economic thumbs up. It's why the numbers keep rising, even though more and more companies won't come back. It's simply because there's more and more at the top. So the irony there, yeah, the Amazon distribution center will be your local shopping mall. I did want to share this graphic, which pairs nicely. Am I on the right side here?
Looks good.
1968, fastest rising field in medicine, immunology. You know why? We need it. Next up is Erica Christ. And for all of her credentials, and she's not yet working for Amazon, but my favorite things about Erica, I do not wake up before 5 in the afternoon. So I'm asleep while doing this. But occasionally I get up and I put on the TV at like 3 a.m. and she's on a cooking show. She's on a local cooking show. So in addition to her celebrity, and deservedly so, for being part of the great Christ family and the Black Forest Empire, she's also a playwright, an essayist, and in the good sense of the word. How do they make the word activist go bad? Let's say Whittier neighborhood involved, caring person about her community, and founder of Cheap Theater, Erica Christ. Oops. We have technical difficulty. Put up that card with the number on it. There we go.
Okay, hello. This is a piece I wrote in February. It's the last thing that I have written this year. Yeah, so it's sort of wintry. On my way to work the other day, I walked by a young woman wearing a pink sweatshirt with the words "Style of Pretty" written on the back in a looping, flowery script. Her back was to me as I approached, and when I first glanced at her, I thought her shirt read "Yogurt or Poetry." Alas, at second glance, it was revealed to be something equally absurd but much less amusing. That was how my day started. I should have taken it as a sign. I should have understood that not paying attention to what's happening around me is an indication that I'm a little bit overloaded and should try to take it easy. Instead, I almost walked into a lamppost because I was thinking, under what circumstances would you possibly have to choose between yogurt and poetry? I misread things and mishear things all the time, and they're often similarly silly. Usually I'm similarly preoccupied. But sometimes I'm more than preoccupied, and my mistakes are more stupid and frustrating than absurd and silly. I'm trying to do some work on the house next door, my rental property. At the same time, I'm in the middle of 3 or 4 projects at work. I'm planning a year's worth of shows. We're getting ready to move my sister-in-law into a new senior living apartment, and my driver's license expired 2 weeks ago. I've been to Menards 4 times this week. I bought the wrong closet door track, the wrong light bulbs, the wrong switch, the wrong mouse traps. I bought a ceiling fan that I didn't need because the only problem with the old one was that I put the wrong light bulbs in it. I paid $65 to have an electrician tell me that. My husband and I got into an argument in the returns line of Menards. It was so exasperated and bitchy that the security guard moved away from us. The electric company had to call me to remind me to pay my bill. So did the water people. I drove through a red light when the light on the next block turned green. That is not good. I've had get a haircut on my list of things to do for 4 months. At work at the restaurant this week, I wrote 2 different reservations down on the wrong day, and I forgot entirely to write one down. Last night I was working behind the bar, and I had an order for a vodka martini. I made it, but it really didn't look right. It only filled a quarter of the glass. It took me a full minute of staring at it, wondering what was wrong, to realize that I had forgotten to put the vodka in it. Later, I could have sworn I heard someone say, "I brought my kangaroo today." I figured that I had probably misheard it, but I looked around anyway because that would be amazing if it were true. I caught the eye of the person who said it, and they repeated, "How are you doing today?" And I had to make an effort to keep the disappointment out of my voice when I said, "I'm fine, how are you?" If I am successfully masquerading as a fully functional adult, it's only because other people are also preoccupied with their own problems and projects, and they are not paying any attention to me at all. In fact, I really hope that's true. When I got home from work last night at about 1:30 in the morning, my husband drew my attention to the several thousand crows that had roosted in the 4 or 5 boulevard trees that are right in front of our house. We bundled up and sat on the front steps to listen and watch for a while. In the daylight, crows are still black, but they glisten and shine in the light. Their legs and beaks and eyes are all distinct features. On a clear, dark night, they're only shapes, black on dark blue. They're tall, angular shapes on the branches. The trees they roost in take on the look of an alien species, thick with upright silhouettes that are too big for leaves, too thick for branches. They're massive, menacing shapes in flight. Every sound startles a few of them. Even a dozen birds make a loud whoosh when they rise. They swirl and twist as they decide where to land again. Some go back to the same spot, some land on the next tree. Some fly out of sight, then suddenly back to land. You get the sense that they are on patrol, maybe surveying the two of us on the steps, maybe the whole block. They do not sleep quietly. They make sounds like ducks, like bleating lambs, like yowling cats. There was a loud murmur of quacks and snorts, with only the very rare caw, caw that's so familiar during the day and audible half a mile away. These funny little sounds were barely audible inside the house, right next to the trees they roosted in. The crow language is perhaps best appreciated at night. The range of sounds we heard was incredible, even as they made me giggle at the perfect mimicry of other animals. It's hard not to feel at least a little bit special when 2,000 crows descend exactly on your corner of the world. We reluctantly went inside because we were cold. I looked out the bedroom window at them for a little while, but it isn't the same as being out there. Once settled in bed, I could just barely hear them, but I could hear them as I drifted off to sleep. I am selling myself short. I really have gotten quite a bit done. I've kept working at the things that aren't done yet. I got my sister-in-law's finances worked out so she can move comfortably. I checked the references on the tenant applications that we got and have all the needed repairs underway. I've finished some projects early and started others on time. I might be careening around most days, sometimes ridiculously, but mostly I'm careening in the right direction and rarely careening into anyone else. If there's one thing that's easy to forget about the world right now, especially right now, it's that it is often, most of the time, in fact, a forgiving place.
Don't touch anything.
All right, sorry.
Uh-oh.
Thank you, Erica. That was Erica Christ on the birth of surrealism. Right before taping, there was a curious mix of COVID-19 and Corvid-19, which was the celebration last year for all the crows. I have nothing to say. Boy, is that not true. But I have nothing useful to say except thank you very much, Hamill Griffin-Cassidy, for taping us today, and Laura Packer and Erica Christ. And please support the arts and be kind and share your stories and write a poem and post a picture on a telephone pole and leave a haiku on a bus seat. Whatever it is, it's driving me crazy that everything's on camera. And I hope that apart from right now, you watching this, you otherwise are not. Thank you very much, Dogs Without Cabins.
Well, that's it, huh?
That's it. Yay.
Okay.
And now we sacrifice
Stand by.
the roll.
Yeah, yeah.
That was good.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, but add that I don't like either poetry or yogurt. I had that delay on the punchline. I had it built in a couple of years ago because I was talking way too much, so they
Yep.
put the.
Yeah.
Modify your thoughts 2 minutes from now.
Yeah. Yeah.
In D. Malay, they always said it was think twice before speaking once.